Welcome. My name is Alaric West, and this is my confession. It started with a scream that didn't belong in a hospital. Not the kind that fades down sterile corridors, not pain turned clinical by white walls and latex gloves. This one was raw, human, shaking through every layer of glass between her room and mine. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was on my way to meet the hospital director to sign a donation agreement for the new neonatal unit bearing my family name. The irony didn't miss me later, that I came to write a check for newborns and ended up staying for one. I saw her first through the narrow window beside the maternity ward's door. She was gripping the edge of the bed, half sitting, half fighting gravity, sweat turning her hair into dark ropes against her skin. There was no one beside her. No husband whispering reassurance, no friend holding her hand. The monitors blinked and beeped with mechanical indifference, the only rhythm that matched her ragged breathing. A nurse rushed past me, muttering something about an absent father. The phrase stung for reasons I couldn't name. I should have walked away. I had meetings waiting, people who used my time like currency. But instead, I stood there, frozen, watching a stranger wrestle life into the world while the man who'd promised to stay had simply vanished. Her name was on the chart hanging by the door. * Susie Moore. * 28. No complications noted, except the obvious one, abandonment. I asked the nurse, quietly, if anyone had been called for her. She shook her head. The father left when her contraction started. Said he was getting the car. Never came back. The words landed heavier than I expected. I knew what it was to be left behind in moments that split your life in two. Years ago, I'd stood in a similar corridor while they covered a body with a sheet, my wife, gone before I could say goodbye. I remembered the silence that followed, how it echoed louder than grief. Watching Susie now, I saw the same silence waiting for her, and it made something inside me shift. The minutes crawled. Her cries rose and broke and returned again, desperate music played against the hum of machines. When the child finally came, the room felt eerily still. I couldn't breathe until I heard it, a small, broken wail, the sound of someone refusing to give up on existence. The nurse stepped into the hallway a few moments later, holding a clipboard and a trembling smile. A boy, she said softly. Tiny, but strong. I nodded, unable to form a single sensible reply. My throat burned. Susie was barely conscious when they moved her to recovery. She kept turning her head weakly toward the door, whispering something I couldn't hear until the nurse leaned closer and murmured it aloud. She's asking if he's coming back. He wasn't. I didn't know why I did it, but I stayed. I stood there long after visiting hours ended, watching through that glass panel while she drifted in and out of exhausted sleep. Her face looked too young to hold so much pain. There was blood on her lip where she'd bitten down to keep from crying too loud. The doctor came by later, speaking low. She has no insurance, no emergency contact. We'll have to transfer her to the public ward tomorrow. He sighed, already half defeated. I heard my own voice before I could stop it. Put the bills under the West Foundation account. The doctor blinked at me, startled. You know her? No, I said. Not yet. That night, as I walked down the quiet hallway toward the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. A man in a tailored coat, face pale under fluorescent light, eyes too tired to hide what they'd seen. Behind me, in that room, lay a woman who had been left to face the storm alone. I told myself it was pity. It wasn't. Because when I heard her whisper his name again, half asleep, begging a ghost to come back, something deep in me answered, a vow I didn't even realize I was making. That if no one else came for her, I would. Morning arrived gray and damp, the kind of morning when the city itself looks exhausted. Rain traced thin, uncertain lines down the hospital windows, turning everything outside into a blur of silver and shadow. I should have been sitting at the long oak table in my office downtown, arguing over mergers and percentages that changed nothing in me. Instead, I was standing again in that quiet corridor, staring through glass at a woman who had no idea her life had already entangled with mine. Susie was awake. She looked impossibly young in the pale light, her face washed clean of makeup, her hair tied in a loose braid that had already fallen apart. The boy, her boy, lay in the small plastic bassinet beside her bed, wrapped tightly in a white blanket patterned with faded blue stars. He was so small it made my throat tighten just looking at him. Susie turned her head toward him every few seconds, as if to confirm he was real, as if love could evaporate if she didn't keep watching. A nurse entered quietly, holding a clipboard. I saw the polite conversation through the glass. Questions, nods, the small smile nurses learn to use when saying things no one wants to hear. Susie's expression changed slowly. Confusion first, then fear. She reached for the pen the nurse offered, hesitated, and set it back down. Her shoulders slumped. The nurse sighed, touched her hand gently, and left. When the nurse passed me in the hallway, I stopped her. "What was that about?" She hesitated before answering. "Payment form. The patient doesn't have insurance. She said she'd figure something out by tomorrow." "Figure something out," I repeated, as if the phrase itself were a crime. "She'll have to transfer to county if she can't pay." The nurse lowered her voice. "And she's still recovering from the birth. It's not safe for her to move yet." I nodded once too sharply. "Put it under the West Foundation account." The nurse blinked. "Sir, that fund exists to help women like her." I interrupted. "Don't mention my name." She gave a short nod and walked away. I turned back toward the glass. Inside, Susie had lifted her son, pressing his cheek against hers. He whimpered softly, then went quiet, soothed by a voice too faint for me to hear. She looked fragile, yes, but there was a steadiness in her eyes, something fierce that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with love. Hours passed in small fragments, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, the hum of machines, the smell of disinfectant and instant coffee. I told myself I'd leave after one more look. I never did. By late afternoon, the sky lightened, rain tapering to a fine mist. The corridor was nearly empty. Her door stood ajar now, the sound of soft humming spilling out into the hall. Against my better judgment, I knocked once. She looked up, startled, the color rising to her cheeks. "Oh, I thought you were the nurse." "Sorry," I said, stepping closer but not inside. "I was just checking how you were doing." For a moment, she only stared, unsure what to make of a stranger in an expensive suit standing awkwardly by her bed. Then her face softened. "I'm surviving." She smiled weakly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "He's asleep for now." "That's a miracle." I glanced at the baby. "He has your mouth," I said before thinking. Her smile faded. "You think so?" "I wouldn't know. His father's never seen him." Her voice cracked on the last word. She tried to cover it with a small laugh, the kind that hurts to hear. "He said he was getting the car," she added, more to herself than to me. That was 6 hours before the contraction started. I didn't respond. Some silences deserve respect. She shifted carefully, adjusting the baby's blanket. "Sorry. I shouldn't talk about that. You don't even know me." "I know enough," I said quietly. "And you don't owe anyone an apology for being abandoned." Her eyes met mine, searching for something. Pity, maybe. I gave her none. What I felt wasn't pity. It was recognition of someone standing at the edge of ruin and still choosing to love what life had left her. The nurse came back then, holding a folder. Miss Moore, she said brightly. Good news. The payment's been processed. You're cleared to stay as long as you need for observation. Susie blinked, confused. What? I didn't. Who paid? The nurse smiled. Anonymous donation. Someone wanted to help. Susie frowned, suspicion flickering across her tired face. Anonymous, she repeated slowly. Her gaze shifted toward me. That's convenient. I shrugged lightly. Maybe people are kinder than we think. Her mouth curved, half amused, half disbelieving. Not in my experience. She looked back down at her son, tracing a fingertip along his tiny hand. Still, maybe this once. The nurse left us alone again. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitor beside her bed. I stood there longer than I should have, caught in the strange quiet between her breathing and the baby's. When I finally turned to leave, she spoke again, so softly I almost missed it. What's your name? Michael, I said, the name I gave when I didn't want to be Alaric West, billionaire benefactor, man with more ghosts than friends. Thank you, Michael, she whispered. 4. Checking. I nodded and stepped into the hall. Through the glass, I saw her settle back against the pillow, her baby pressed close, both of them fading into sleep. The corridor lights flickered above me, humming in the quiet. I told myself I wouldn't come back, that this small act of kindness had been enough. But as I walked out into the cooling evening, I knew that was a lie. Something had begun, quiet but irreversible. And whatever it was, it had my name on it. 2 days later, she was still there. I told myself I'd stopped by the hospital to sign the final papers for the donation fund. That was partly true. What I didn't admit, not even to myself, was that I wanted to see if she'd made it through another night. Susie was sitting by the window when I found her. The morning sun painted her skin in a warm, tired glow. She looked stronger, but her hand still trembled slightly when she adjusted the baby's blanket. There was a plastic bracelet on her wrist, her name smudged from water and sleepless hours. Michael, she said when she noticed me, her voice soft but clearer now. You're back. Just checking on my investment, I said, nodding toward the baby. He looks like a solid return. Her laugh was small but real, the first time I'd heard it. You talk like you've never held a child. I smiled faintly. Not for a long time. She didn't ask what that meant, and I was grateful. Most people would have. She just looked down at her son, eyes full of something I couldn't name. He doesn't even have a name yet, she murmured. I keep waiting to feel sure. I stepped closer, careful not to cross the invisible line between sympathy and intrusion. You'll know when it's right. She glanced up at me, half smiling. You sound like someone who's done this before. No, I said quietly, but I've watched someone who did. Her gaze softened. I could feel the air shift slightly between us, like two strangers beginning to recognize the outlines of something neither of them expected. A nurse entered, carrying a folder. Miss Moore, she said, her tone brisk but kind. The doctor wants you discharged by evening. You and the baby are healthy enough to go home. The word home hung in the air like a cruel joke. I saw it hit her, the way her shoulders straightened, how she nodded too quickly. When the nurse left, she sighed. Home, she repeated under her breath. That's generous. I rent a room above a laundromat. They'll probably be glad to see me gone. I didn't think before speaking. You shouldn't take the baby there. Her eyes flashed. Why not? It's what I can afford. I'm not judging, I said carefully. I'm just saying you've been through enough. The air in that place probably smells like bleach and regret. That earned me another reluctant laugh. You have a strange way of caring, Michael. Maybe it's the only way I know. Silence stretched between us. Outside the window, a delivery truck backed up, beeping endlessly. Somewhere down the corridor, a newborn cried, shrill, demanding life. She broke the quiet first. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered, not to me, not to anyone in particular. "He's here, and I love him, but everything else is gone. His father, the job, the apartment. I thought I had more time to figure things out." Her words twisted something in me that had been dormant for years. I'd built my empire on precision, on controlling outcomes before they turned into problems. And yet here was this woman, fragile and fierce, living in a chaos she hadn't chosen, still refusing to break. I took out a small card from my wallet and placed it on the edge of her table. "This is an address," I said. "A furnished apartment I own downtown. No contracts, no expectations. Just a safe place for you and the baby until you can find your footing." She stared at the card, then at me. "Why would you do that?" "Because no one should go home to a laundromat after surviving what you did." Her jaw tightened. "People don't just hand out apartments, Michael. People don't just give birth alone either." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I don't want charity." "It isn't charity," I said quietly. "It's a loan in kindness. Pay it back however you want, whenever you can. Or not at all." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the card before pulling it closer. "You really don't give up, do you? Not when something matters." She looked at me then, really looked, as if she was trying to see past the quiet words and clean suit. "You're hiding something," she said. "You don't talk like a man who's just being nice." Maybe she was right. There were entire cities of truth I never let anyone enter. I smiled instead of answering. "I'll send a car at noon tomorrow. If you're ready, it'll take you there. If not, I'll understand." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, Michael. But just until I can stand on my own." "Good," I said. "That's all I want." When I walked out of her room, the nurse passed me again, asking if I'd be attending the foundation gala that night. I almost laughed. How could I explain that my entire life, the boardrooms, the applause, the wealth, suddenly felt smaller than a quiet room where a woman named Susie was learning how to hold a future in her arms? As I stepped into the elevator, I caught one last glimpse of her through the small glass window. She was holding her son close, whispering to him with the kind of tenderness that made the world outside irrelevant. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't want to go back to the life waiting for me upstairs in the clouds. I wanted to start again, down here, where things still hurt and still mattered. 3 days after she left the hospital, I found him. Her husband. Not a ghost, not a tragedy, not some poor soul swallowed by circumstance. No, he was very much alive, sitting in a half-lit roadside bar off Route 9, nursing a beer like it was the best decision he had made all week. He looked smaller than I expected. Grease under his fingernails, a half-buttoned shirt that had forgotten what soap smelled like, and the kind of grin men wear when they think they've outsmarted the world. He didn't notice me at first. I watched him through the haze of cigarette smoke and the jukebox's tired hum, trying to understand what kind of man walks away from a woman in labor. The bartender slid another beer across the counter. "That one's from the gentleman at the back." He turned, eyes narrowing when he saw me, tailored coat, silence sharper than the blade in my pocket. "You the one buying my drink?" he asked, swaggering up to my table. "Yes," I said. "Sit down." He hesitated, then shrugged and dropped into the chair opposite. "You a lawyer? Debt collector?" "Neither." I leaned forward, the low light cutting across his face. "I'm the man who covered the hospital bills for your wife." His smirk faltered, just barely. "Ex-wife," he corrected. And I don't owe her, or you, anything. I let the words hang there, heavy and stupid. She gave birth alone, I said evenly. While you were here, drinking to your freedom. He went to the hospital on business, and stayed when he heard a woman in labor had been left by her husband. She was giving birth alone, with no support, no home, no hope. She'd lost everything. He'd forgotten how to feel. But that night, something in him changed. A story about a meeting that was never meant to happen, and how one act of compassion can bring two broken lives back to life. He chuckled. Yes, the timing worked out. Something in me went cold. I'd seen cruelty before, in boardrooms, in backrooms, in polished men who ruined lives with signatures, but this was something else. This was cowardice pretending to be freedom. You left her, I said quietly. You left your own child. He lifted his beer in a mock toast. She'll survive. She always does. She wanted the kid more than I did. Not my problem. There it was. Not guilt, not even anger, just indifference. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Here's how this goes, I said. You don't call her. You don't go near her. You don't even whisper her name in a bar again. If you do, I'll make sure every door you knock on in this city slams shut before you touch the handle. He laughed, loud and reckless. You think money scares me? I leaned closer until he could see what was in my eyes. No. But losing the little dignity you've got left might. The laughter stopped. He looked away first. They always do. I walked out before my anger turned into something worse. The night air bit cold, but it was cleaner than the rot inside that bar. Back in the car, I sat for a long time with my hands still trembling on the wheel. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, or what I wanted to do next. Protecting her had already crossed the line between compassion and obsession, and I didn't care. When I finally pulled away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back wasn't the one who had written billion-dollar contracts or stood on magazine covers. He was someone else entirely, someone who'd found a reason to feel again, even if it burned. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of her husband's smirk kept replaying in my mind, taunting me. But over it all, I kept hearing her voice from the hospital bed, soft and broken. Asterisk. He said he was getting the car. Asterisk. No, I thought. He never deserved to drive her anywhere. And for the first time since my own loss, I prayed, not for forgiveness, but for the strength to keep my promise. If no one else came for her, I would. The storm started before the rain. One of those nights when the air feels electric, like the city itself is holding its breath before something breaks. I hadn't meant to go out. I was halfway through a report when I glanced at the empty space on my wrist and remembered. The watch. My father's watch. The only thing of his eye kept. I'd left it at that damn bar a few nights ago, after confronting the man who'd walked out on her. It wasn't about the money. It never was. That watch had ticked through every failure I'd survived, every deal, every goodbye. I couldn't let it stay there, gathering smoke and beer stains among men who'd forgotten what promises were worth. So I drove back. The streets glistened under the first flickers of lightning, the city humming with the kind of tension that feels personal. The sign was still broken, buzzing faintly above the door. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out into the wet night. And that's when I saw it. Her car. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, the same dinted silver sedan, the one she always said she'd replace, when life finally caught up. But it was real. And in that instant, the watch didn't matter anymore. Inside, the place was nearly empty except for the storm pressing against the windows. He was there too, hunched over a table, cheap whiskey half gone. She stood across from him, rain still clinging to her hair, shoulders squared like she'd been rehearsing this confrontation for months. I stayed near the door, invisible in the dim light, just close enough to hear. "You left me," she said quietly. "You left your son." He scoffed, rolling the glass between his fingers. "You always wanted too much. I never asked for this life." Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. "You asked for me." He laughed, sharp, cruel, the kind of sound that makes decent people forget their patience. "You were a mistake, Susie. You and that kid. You think anyone's going to save you now? You're not worth saving." "That was when I moved." He didn't see me until my hand was on his shoulder. I pulled him up and slammed him against the wall hard enough for the frames to rattle. The glass fell from his hand and shattered at our feet. "Careful, West," he sneered, blood at the corner of his mouth. "You think money makes her yours?" Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. I only knew that no one else was ever going to make her cry like this again. "She's not yours to talk about," I said, low and certain. He grinned, the kind of grin men wear when they know how to rot in peace. "You think you're her hero? You're just her next disaster." I didn't hit him. God knows I wanted to. Instead, I leaned close enough for him to hear the thing I'd never said out loud. "If you ever go near her again, I'll make sure the only thing left of your name is a line on a police report." He went still then. Even drunk men know the sound of truth when it's spoken quietly enough. I stepped back, shaking with the effort of not destroying him. The bartender pretended to find something interesting behind the counter. The rain outside had turned violent, wind howling through the cracks. Susie was crying, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, grief, release, exhaustion. When I turned to her, she met my eyes through the blur of tears. "Why are you here?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer good enough for her, only the one that had lived in me since that first night. "To make sure you don't face monsters alone again." She took a breath that sounded like it hurt. "He left me in labor," she said softly. "You walked in. Why?" I should have said something clean. Something easy. But the truth doesn't come dressed for company. "Because I know what it feels like to lose someone before you ever get to say you love them." The words hung between us, raw and trembling. She stepped closer, rain dripping from her hair, her hand shaking as it reached for mine. Outside, lightning flashed, cutting the night in two. She didn't kiss me. She didn't have to. The look she gave me was enough. A fragile, unspoken promise that maybe, finally, she believed she wasn't alone. And in that storm, with thunder rolling above and regret settling quietly between us, I realized something I hadn't dared to name until then. I hadn't just saved her. She'd saved what was left of me. I drove her home in silence, the kind that feels too fragile to break. The roads were slick and empty, streetlights flickering over her rain-soaked hair as she held the sleeping boy against her chest. She didn't say a word, and she didn't have to. Every mile felt like a confession neither of us was ready to speak. Morning came late, thick with fog and quiet after the storm. The city looked rinsed clean, as if it had tried to forget everything that happened the night before. I hadn't gone home. I couldn't. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel tucked into her chest, the smallest sigh escaping her every few minutes. I sat in the armchair opposite, watching the sun crawl across her face through the rain-streaked window. The light found her slowly, like even the day was being careful not to wake her too soon. When she finally stirred, she blinked, dazed. "You stayed," she whispered. I smiled. "Someone had to." Her eyes softened, not the shy, unsure look she used to have, but something steadier, deeper. The kind of look that comes when someone finally stops expecting to be left behind. We talked quietly while the city woke around us. About Daniel. About the future. About nothing at all. She brewed coffee that tasted faintly of burnt hope, and I drank every drop like it was sacred. "You can't keep showing up for me like this," she said finally, her voice gentle but uncertain. "I'm not showing up for you," I said. "I'm showing up with you." She looked down at her hands, a faint smile pulling at her mouth. "You always know the right thing to say, don't you?" "No," I said. "Just the honest thing." The apartment felt different now. Lived in. There were toys on the floor, a bottle drying by the sink, curtains fluttering with the wind. It was chaos, real, human, ordinary chaos, and I had never wanted anything more. Weeks passed like a slow exhale. Her laughter returned first. Then her confidence. Then the way she started reaching for my hand without thinking. I brought Daniel a small stuffed bear one morning, ridiculous and expensive. She rolled her eyes, but took it anyway. "You spoil him," she said. "I'm investing," I replied, "in the only future worth anything." We fell into rhythm, not the dramatic kind built on rescues and grand gestures, but the quiet kind that grows from shared mornings and soft glances. Sometimes, late at night, she'd stand on the balcony while I worked, the city lights painting her in gold. I'd watch her reflection in the glass, hair loose, face calm, and it would hit me again, the impossible luck of being allowed into her life at all. One night, she turned from the railing and caught me staring. "What?" she asked, smiling. "You're going to ruin me," I said. "Too late," she whispered, stepping close enough that her breath warmed my skin. When she kissed me, it wasn't the kind of kiss that asks for permission or promises forever. It was the kind that says, "We survived." That no matter how much the world had taken from us, it hadn't taken everything. Afterward, we stood there in silence, the hum of the city below us, her head resting against my chest. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "That night at the hospital? That you didn't walk away?" I brushed my thumb over her jaw, tracing the line that always trembled when she tried not to cry. "Every part of my life before that night feels like practice for finding you." Her eyes filled, but she smiled. The real kind? The kind that starts in the soul before it reaches the mouth. "You sound like a man in love." I kissed her again. "That's because I am." Months later, the world decided to notice us. Headlines called her the billionaire's girl, whispered about the scandal of a man like me loving a woman like her. Let them whisper. They didn't know that love had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with a hospital hallway, a small child, and a promise made in silence. Daniel took his first steps in my office, between marble floors and city views that once meant nothing. She laughed until she cried. I'd built empires, but that moment, his wobbling steps toward her, was the only victory that ever mattered. Sometimes, when the city sleeps and the noise finally dies, she still asks me the same question. "Why did you stay that night?" And I always give her the same answer, because it's the only truth I've ever lived by. "Because someone had to walk in when everyone else walked out." Then I pull her closer, feel the warmth of her against me, and thank whatever cruel, beautiful twist of fate put me behind a glass on the night she broke, because it was the night I finally came back to life.